Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. This is Marta's Sci-Fi Seminar, and we are now in our 7th video on drafting your first novel. And if you've been watching the videos as a subscriber or just viewing them on your own approximately every couple of weeks as you work through the process that I've laid out, then you are, with any luck, at 30,000 words. Yay! 30,000 words is really fantastic. And you all are getting a more enthusiastic 30,000 words than the mystery folks because I had a headache coming on when I was recording the mystery video for that channel. But congratulations. This is all set up to get you to a draft of 60 to 70,000 words. Some of you are probably going to go longer than that, and that's okay. This is just aimed at giving you a baseline, giving you a chance to really kind of get going, get motivated, get traction. Traction is so that sense that you have words behind you, even if you have words ahead, and you are on the road and doing the thing. That's so important, that sense of momentum, that sense of forward motion. And if you have reached 30,000 words or anywhere close to it, yay! That is seriously fantastic, folks. And I'm really, really happy for you. Keep going. It's mostly downhill from here. So yay, 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 yay. 30,000 words all by itself is an incredible accomplishment. And as a big chunk of a larger project, it is even more so. So keep going back to your outline as you need to. Keep going back to brainstorming as you need to. If you feel like you need to just walk around in the world of the novel a little bit, feel free to write some little things on the side that you think, okay, this probably doesn't fit in the main flow of the narrative, but this lets me think about the characters in the setting, doing some things. Whatever you need to do to be able to keep moving forward. That's fantastic stuff, folks. The element of fiction we're going to talk about today is point of view. And then I have not one, but 2 book reviews for you by disabled writers. So we're going to get to that too. Point of view. Old school, traditional, let's say 19th, early to mid 20th century novels, we get a lot of omniscient narrators. What I mean by omniscient narrator as a point of view is stories told from the point of view of somebody who knows everything that's going to happen, who isn't particularly invested in the emotional well-being of any given character. We're just getting the story, the whole story from this kind of godlike point of view. Okay, you know, we don't see so much of that anymore. That point of view can be useful, but it has its own limitations. It doesn't let us really get too close to anybody either. And it can start to sound tonally a little dry, a little monotonous. And when I talk about third person, what I mean is he, she, them. We're being told about people rather than it's being told by a people. More often what you see in contemporary novels is what we call limited omniscient third-person narration. So we're still getting the story told by some unknown entity or possibly by a known entity, but it's told as he, she, them. However, in a limited omniscient novel, we stick pretty close to a given character or set of characters. We know something about the internal workings of those characters from the narration, because we don't know everything about everybody, but we know certain things about certain characters, and we may actually know that certain things are happening that the main character doesn't know. It sets up the possibility of, oh, okay, wow, character A is having these thoughts and feelings about character B. Character B is engaged in something that character A knows nothing about that might change those thoughts and feelings. So we have limited omniscience gives us some options for dramatic tension that fully omniscient narration or that first-person narration may not give us. Limited omniscience. And if I sound like I'm a fan of limited omniscience, hey, I'm a fan of limited omniscience. That's how I chose to write my novels. Because I felt I had tried writing in first person and it felt too close. I didn't feel like I was getting to focus on other characters other than Demeter West, who's my protagonist, the way that I wanted to. And with an omniscient narrator, gosh, if you've managed to delve into many people's thoughts and feelings, then you have a really long book that feels kind of ponderous. So omniscient narrators, like I said, it's an older, fully omniscient narrators. It's an older way of doing things. We tend not to do that so much because then we just don't get as close to anybody. And if you're a fan, it's no surprise. I've said it before. I'm a real fan of character-driven fiction. So limited omniscience gives you a nice way to. And that omniscience is the all-knowing narrator. So limited omniscience may be a contradiction in terms, but it is how the term gets used. You know a limited amount of everything there is to know. Other points of view, first person is a pretty common point of view. If you're telling a story in first person, then you're using the I voice. I went to the store and bought bread, and then I walked home. Okay? First person narration has its limitations, like you only get your narrator's real perspective on everything, unless you are doing you're switching viewpoints among multiple first-person narrators. And I have seen a lot more novels doing that kind of thing recently, particularly young adult novels that use that first-person narration, but that move then among various points of view to tell the tale. What that amounts to is a lot like the effect you get with a limited omniscient third-person narrator, that you might move among the same set of characters. You can argue if you're in first person in 4 or 5 different characters, then you're really getting more psychological depth. I don't know. It's the kind of thing you can start a fight in a writer bar about. Limited omniscience versus multiple first person narrators. These are all possible points of view to use as you write your novel. These are all things that it's worth thinking about. You need to decide what's comfortable for you, what's going to serve you best. There is no right or wrong answer. The point of view that, again, is not a right or wrong answer, but does put you in a very particular camp is if you're using second person point of view. That would be the you voice. You go to the store, you buy a loaf of bread, and then you walk home. If you're doing that, hey, guess what? Congratulations, you're an experimental novelist. That's a commitment. That's a real commitment. Only a certain number of folks are going to be willing to buy into an experimental novel that's written that way, especially if it's a novel of any length. It can be fun in short bits to do second person, but doing second person over a long haul can get to be an irritation for your readers. So just something to think about. If you're committed to the experimental model, by all means. Second person isn't the only way to be experimental. It is a way of being experimental. After all, science fiction, fantasy, paranormal fiction, these are all genres that have the possibility of experimentation there in their very setup. So if you want to mess around with second person, that is your prerogative. But that's, when we talk about elements of fiction, that's what point of view stuff is all about. We're talking about who's telling the story, how are they telling it, through what lens, from what point of view, from what viewpoint. And there are also ways of kind of mixing and matching a little bit of this too, and I should say that before I leave this particular topic, and that is even if you're not writing in first person, or if you have a main first person narrator, including letters, including emails, including texts, other word artifacts that come from other characters, that's a way of, over the short term, pulling in an additional point of view. Or if you're using, say, a limited omniscient narrator who has some insight into a handful of the characters in the novel, but you want a little flavor of that first person sense, including one of those kinds of artifacts can give you a little of that first person narration without committing the entire novel to that first person point of view. So, something to think about. On to the reviews. As I've said previously, I'm in the process of learning more about writers with disabilities, finding work by writers with disabilities, looking at disability narratives. Interestingly, I'm going to talk about two things today. The first one is an old favorite craft of writing book of mine. This is Stephen King's On Writing. Stephen King is not someone I would consider a writer who's been overlooked, and yet I think this particular book of his does get overlooked. King was in a terrible car accident in 1999. He was injured in multiple ways, bones broken, head injury, lung injury. On Writing was his way back to functioning as a writer as he healed from those injuries. And it functions as a disability narrative in many ways. He talks very openly about the process of beginning to work again after the cognitive damage of the head injury, the process of beginning to function again as his body was healing, the physical difficulties involved in standing and sitting and moving after physical trauma like that. And he's woven this all in with various short pieces about his writing process that he then collected up into larger pieces. So On Writing is a book I highly recommend, also as a craft book, but it is, in its own way, a book full of the narrative of disability and recovery. So, in most cases, when we think about disabled writers, we think about folks who are dealing with more permanent impairments, physical, emotional, mental. In King's case, he was certainly left with some permanent impairments, but nothing to the acuity of what he's dealing with in the time frame. Okay, my other review today, sorry about that, minor interruption, is by another writer with a disability, Leigh Bardugo, who is the author of the Shadow and Bone trilogy, just adapted this last summer by Netflix, and I believe coming back for a second season also. Bardugo suffers from a bone disease that has caused joint pain, mobility impairment. I find it really interesting to be reading the Shadow and Bone trilogy and looking at, she has characters, Elena Starkov in particular, in the Shadow and Bone trilogy, that experience disabilities of various kinds. And it's interesting to read this knowing that Bardugo herself has a chronic condition. I do know also, I have not yet read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, although I have heard many enthusiastic reviews of those books as well, which come later in Bardugo's Grishaverse novels. But I have heard Bardugo herself talk in interviews about Kaz Brecker, who's one of the central characters in Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. The reason Kaz has a cane and has difficulty walking is because for Bardugo, that was a way to talk about her own disability through the lens of this character. But for those of you who are not familiar with the Grishaverse or with the Shadow and Bone trilogy or the Six of Crows books, they're pretty wonderful. They are set in a fantastical world, technology approximately World War I, and magic is, Grisha magic is very much a part, Grisha abilities are very much a part of the world. Grisha can do things like cause wind, they can manipulate the air to cause wind to blow, they can call fire, they can, in Elena's case, summon light. So there are also Grisha who work with the physical world, materialki, who can do alchemical kinds of things, heart renders, who can do physical manipulation of bodies. It's a really interesting mythos, and the political tensions, how all these Grisha and their magical abilities fit into the political tensions, is compelling. I highly recommend the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and as I said, I'm familiar with a lot of very enthusiastic reviews of the Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom books. She's got even another couple of books, I believe, that are also part of the Grisha verse, as it's called, that are separate yet from the storyline of the Shadow and Bone trilogy and the Six of Crows, at this point, duology. So, more reading to do, but please do celebrate your 30,000 words or more. If you're not quite there, celebrate where you are. Keep making progress. Keep working. Don't stop to edit yet. That's a whole separate step, and we'll get there eventually. Right now, just keep reading, keep drafting, enjoy, and I will see you in another couple of weeks.